Initially, I went in around middle of April or sometime in April with General Andy O'Donnell, Dick Hawes, myself, Deej Kiley from MABS, and we had also an engineer from First Wing. And we were, quote unquote, a survey team that went in and kind of analyzed the ground to see actually how we were going to build out the air base that we were ultimately going to develop. My contribution to that group was to sketch out a security plan for what the engineer had envisioned for the base. So with that, we went back, briefed both Wing and 3rd Division, and ultimately came to some sort of an idea about how large of a unit we were going to need. My initial recommendation was that we're going to need almost a battalion, if not a battalion, of infantry, because there was no security around that airstrip at all. And ultimately what we ended up with was a light battalion, if you will, 2 full infantry companies plus supporting arms from H&S Company of the 3rd Battalion, 9th Marines, and established a hasty perimeter. In came the CBs with their equipment and supplies. So that was a never-ending involvement, if you will, into what ultimately became the final plan. That, I think, was finally stabilized after I left Nam Phang, which was around Thanksgiving of '72. Let's say it was not an easy task. It was a challenge every day. We had not to seem cliche, a very clear and present danger of the CTs attacking the base, the communist terrorists. In addition to that, we had to devise my battalion, light battalion if you will, into 3 segments, 2 security companies and 1 MP company, because internal security and internal security controls was continuing to ramp up, and we needed MPs. So there were different functions, each providing a different service within the security realm. Initially got with the CBs and said, look, you're either going to need a grader or bulldozers to clear the area that was east of the runway, which was the open side of the runway, as far out as we can get, and I would say at a minimum 100 yards, because we needed visibility, we needed fields of fire. Yes. And by and large, I was going to say, probably by the end of June or July, we had slowly kept pushing the vegetation further back and further back. What we couldn't get dug out and cleared by the equipment that the CBs had, we used herbicide. And we controlled the vegetation on critical areas of the perimeter with also herbicide. And the stuff was not very carefully handled, at least from my observation. You had these 55-gallon drums of herbicide. We'll call it Agent Orange for another word. Mm-hmm. They would put a pump handle in the top of the can and start a vacuum, and we had a hose on the other end of it, and we used to spray it just like a garden hose. Now, that stuff with wind and breeze has blowback. And then its persistency, I'm sure of anyone going in after rain or any type of moisture in the air that would blow on the wind would contaminate your clothes, would contaminate your hands and face. So yes, there was some exposure there. Now, how many got exposed and when? I have no idea. We would get updates, INSMs if you will, from both 7th Air Force, from Thai security, as well as our own, and UDORN provided security as well. I mean, security reports as well. Again, not to seem cliche, but there was a clear and present danger. On our patrols, before we were restricted to maintaining only perimeter security and within, we were doing external patrols, both day and night. We were even doing aerial patrols and reconnaissance with our CH-46s. There were observations made of movement outside. Couldn't tell by limitations of visibility whether they were actually CTs, but we knew there were personnel out there. They shouldn't have been out there because it was nothing but jungle. On one distinct patrol, we came across a position that was about, I'm going to say roughly 3,000 meters, maybe not quite that far from the end of the runway. That looked like it was a prepared position without the weapons of either a mortar position or a rocket position. Okay. I mean, we definitely scoped that out and determined that it wasn't anything but the bad guys. So they were there, whether they were going to fire on us or take the risk of preparing a sapper attack, we don't know, but they were there. But because of the vast expansive area on the east side of the runway, it was too tough for us to control. We took helicopters up and tried to see what we could see from the air, but the jungle was so thick with vegetation and trees that it was nearly impossible to see through them. You'd actually have to put men on the ground to do it. We hired one of the locals one time. We knew the bad guys were out there, and moving through the stuff was so thick and laborious. It would wear a man out in the heat and humidity in no time flat, trying to keep some good pace for a patrol to cover a certain amount of ground. So I got the idea, without the knowledge of the chief of staff, to hire a local elephant handler to come in and allow us to put guys on the elephant and have him patrol that eastern side of the runway. And it was working well until the chief of staff found out about it. And he called me in and he said, "What's this stuff about an elephant?"
I have, whose idea was the elephant? I have to.
So, were y'all bareback or y'all sell elephants?
They had a little, it had like a control harness on it, and on it was like a piece of rope that you hung on to. Yeah. It's kind of like, I guess, one of those wild bull rides, but you just held onto the rope. This elephant would go through that stuff with no trouble at all. And we did it up and down the entire length of the runway. And I was paying the guy out of my pocket. It was a couple of $100 baht. I don't know what the heck it was. Yeah. Elephant feed for whatever it was.
In the elephant camp, right?
Sort of. But it ended pretty quickly because the chief said, that's not authorized, cease and desist. We were the talk of the camp for a while, and I was in hot water, but it passed. This is kind of a funny story. Irish came over in my hooch one day, I was maybe a week after we arrived. And he introduced himself and was chatting with me and Phil Reynolds, my exec. He said, "I'd like you to come over and meet my officers sometime. So why don't you come over after normal working hours and we'll have a couple of beers and a drink." I said, "All right, I'll come over." So we arranged that, and I went over and knocked on the door of his tent. Hooch. Now, I guess it was a tent at that point, because I don't think we were all in strong backs. And he was in there with maybe 4 or 5 of his officers. And they had already started their happy hour without me. They were great drinking. He was an Irish whiskey drinker and a cigar chewer and smoker. Feisty little guy. Reminded me of Edward G. Robinson, but with a wrestler's build and a cocky attitude. So we were there, I would think it was maybe 5 or 10 minutes, just jawboning, and I saw him kind of moving closer and closer to me, and I thought, all right, maybe he can't hear me. Well, anyway, it wasn't 30 or 40 seconds. He leaped on me and got me in a chokehold, and we started a wrestling match. I said, what the hell is
Kind of
this?
unusual, but go ahead.
And we started tossing around, rolling on the floor. I had him in the scissors. He had me still in the chokehold. And I guess we wrestled around for at least 5 or 10 minutes. And finally, I guess both of us got tired and let go. He said, I just want to see how tough you grunts were. I said, that's a hell of a way to introduce yourself, Irish. But we got along famously after that. My post reported seeing a professional lady enter the cantonment area. This was after dark. And I thought, you know, we got to stop this stuff. We knew what was going on. Even some of the Marines on security would have a place around a wire to lift up and let these ladies of the night, if you will, in. I don't know how she got in, but she was working part of the cantonment area. And
Checkpoint 3, Tower 10.
anyway, we got the report that she was in this one sector, and we had the hooches kind of mapped out. I said, all right, get me a dog handler and a dog up here. Now, the hooches were designed where the doors opened out. They didn't open in because of space constraints. I said, all right, get me a 2x4, 8 feet long. Found the hooch that she was in, and she evidently was doing her business. So we put the 2x4 against the one door at one end, and we let the handler and the dog in the other end. And all you heard was screaming, hollering, cursing in Thai, high female voice. This dog was growling. He had a mouthful of something. It was a cheek of her butt. We ended up getting her out of there to sick bay, got her patched up, and the doctor said to me, she's a civilian, what do we do with her? I said, sew up the wounds, patch her up, give her a shot at penicillin, which I'm sure she probably needs, and get her the hell out of here. But there were some humorous moments there, believe it or not. I think it's going to be part of the Marine Corps history for all time. Back in World War II, we went in and we developed our own airstrips throughout the islands in the Pacific. They were done from scratch, or they were captured Japanese strips, I don't know. But it was kind of akin to going in and almost bare base developing something that the Air Force shook their head and said, no way, we're not touching this. I think it was more of them not wanting to take the challenge than not having space on their air bases to accommodate a Marine air group. So, and the Marine Corps is always first to serve and never say no. And we went in, we did the job. We did it, I'm going to say, in record time, probably before a lot of people thought we would get it done.
Yes.
And we did it in yeoman's fashion. And I'm very proud of that. And I'm thinking that we probably started a book that's still being written in terms of having to go in and adapt an operation like this. So I feel that we've made a contribution.
So thank you, John. Thank
my
you very,
pleasure.
very much for.
Thanks for having me.
Great, thank you for coming here.